when I came back from a month away and found 98 brand new houses worth over $30 million sitting on land my cattle had grazed for generations. I knew something was rotten in Redwood Bluff. Pamela Rutledge, our local HOA queen, with a smile sharp enough to slice through steel, must have thought she'd pulled off the real estate heist of the century. Too bad she didn't know that one-century-old clause in my grandfather's contract meant she'd just handed me the keys to her precious Cedar Ridge Estates pool. Tennis courts, golf course, and all. Picture the shock of walking your fence line expecting dew-covered pasture, only to see kids playing hopscotch on your land and golden retrievers peeing on your oak trees. If she thought I'd roll over for her HOA nonsense, she clearly didn't know Samuel Whitaker. I'm Samuel Whitaker Sam to my friends 70 years old and stubborn enough to make a mule seem agreeable. For 45 years, I've been a land surveyor, the kind of man who knows every inch of Pine Hollow County like the back of his calloused hands. My grandfather left me 900 acres of rolling hills in 995, along with one piece of advice I've never forgotten, Sam. Never trust a man who measures land without getting his boots muddy. The morning mist here in Redwood Bluff smells of honeysuckle and damp earth, mixed lately with just enough exhaust from the highway to remind you that the city's creeping closer every year. Most mornings, I drink black coffee from my chipped mug while walking my fence lines. The crunch of gravel under my boots, the lowing of cattle, the earthy scent of manure that's my kind of peace. My late wife, Caroline, used to say I kept property records with the same obsessive pride some men reserve for their baseball card collections. She wasn't wrong. 5 years ago, Caroline passed away, and our 2 kids scattered my daughter chasing tech dreams in Seattle, my son building condos in Atlanta. They didn't want the slow, steady life of tending to land. Can't say I blame them, but it left me rattling around a creaky old farmhouse with only my herd, my records, and the occasional neighborly visit from Earl, who talks more about fishing than actually fishing. That piece ended when Pamela Rutledge set her sights on my back pastures. Imagine a woman with perfect hair that's never seen a gust of wind, a clipboard she treats like a weapon, and a voice dripping with corporate charm so fake you can almost hear the plastic. At 55, she'd perfected the HOA president-look designer sunglasses, spotless white SUV, and that frozen smile she probably practiced in a mirror. Her husband, Craig, sits on the Redwood Bluff Town Council, which Pam treats like her personal kingdom. For 8 years, she's circled my property like a hawk, sending middlemen with generous offers for my unused land. Her perfume always arrived before she did, choking out the smell of my pasture. I turned down every offer. The land's not for sale, period. 3 months ago, I left for Oregon to help my daughter through a messy divorce. I expected to come home to the usual, maybe a few downed fence posts or weeds to mow. But the second I turned down my gravel driveway, something was wrong. Instead of birdsong and cattle noises, I heard lawnmowers humming and kids screaming. That's not the kind of soundtrack you get in farm country. The air even smelled wrong, like asphalt and fresh paint, instead of hay and creek water. I grabbed my surveying gear and old habit and walked toward the racket. With every step, the sights got stranger. Fresh driveways, new mailboxes. And then, there it was. 98 pristine, cookie-cutter houses where my cattle should have been grazing. Manicured lawns, decorative street lamps, an entrance arch so over the top it looked like it belonged at the gates of a fancy wedding venue, Cedar Ridge Estates, in swirling gold letters, families unpacking moving vans, kids riding bikes, dogs tearing through my grass like they'd paid for it. For a moment, I wondered if I'd accidentally wandered into another county. But then I saw my grandfather's oak tree, the one where Caroline carved our initials before we married, and Maple Brook gurgling just where it always had. This was my land, every blessed acre of it. That's when she appeared. Pamela came rolling toward me in a golf cart, HOA badge clipped to her blouse, like she was the sheriff of some suburban Wild West. "Excuse me, sir," she said in that syrupy tone that could rot your teeth. "This is private property. Cedar Ridge is a gated community, residents and invited guests only." I took a deep breath, counting to 3 before I spoke. "Ma'am, this is my property. Has been since 1995. Her laugh was the kind that makes you want to check your wallet. Oh, bless your heart. You're mistaken. Cedar Ridge was purchased fair and square from Pine Hollow Development Corporation 2 years ago. She pulled out a folder thick enough to stop a bullet and waved it like it was the Bible. I asked to see the papers. She clutched them tighter. I'm not required to share HOA business with trespassers, she said, but I'm feeling generous today. These families have kids starting school soon. Surely we can come to an arrangement that won't disrupt their lives. That's when I knew. This wasn't ignorance. This was a con job. 3 days later, a Deputy Craig's cousin naturally showed up at my door with a restraining order. According to Pam, I'd threatened residents with surveying equipment in a menacing manner. Apparently, carrying a measuring tape now counted as wielding a weapon. The order barred me from stepping foot on my own back 40 acres. Pam didn't stop there. She sent letters to every Cedar Ridge resident, warning them about the unstable former landowner and forming a safety committee to patrol the property line. They even started taking pictures of me feeding my own cattle, posting them online with captions about suspicious activity. The cherry on top, a Facebook post comparing my old farmhouse to her shiny new subdivision, claiming my unkempt land was lowering property values. The comment section lit up with half the town taking sides. I'd dealt with liars before, but this was war. And if Pamela Rutledge thought I was some clueless old man she could steamroll, she was about to learn why you never pick a fight with a surveyor who keeps every scrap of paperwork going back 3 generations. The morning after that restraining order landed in my hands, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at it like it was a rattlesnake coiled on the wood. I've had property disputes before I once caught a neighbor trying to move a fence line in the dead of night, but never had anyone bold enough to claim my land and label me the dangerous one. Caroline used to say, "Sam, you've only got 2 speeds slow and methodical, or freight train." Well, this was the whistle-blowing, steam hissing, ready to roll moment. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, grabbed my worn leather folder, the one that holds every deed, survey, and map my family's ever touched, and headed straight for the Pine Hollow County Courthouse. If there's one thing 45 years in land surveying has taught me, it's that paper doesn't lie. People will forge, fudge, and fake anything. But the official record, that's where the truth is buried, usually under a pile of bureaucratic dust. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and stale coffee, the kind of place where time moves slower than molasses in January. I stepped up to the clerk's desk and slapped my folder down. The poor kid behind the counter, barely out of high school and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, jumped a little. "I need every record you've got on parcel 42-9B. That's all 900 acres, I said, leaning in just enough to make sure he knew I wasn't in the mood for delays. About an hour later, he slid a manila envelope across the counter. The sale paperwork inside was so thin on details it could have been written on a napkin. The purchase price, $50. Not $50,000. 50. I've seen lawnmowers at yard sales go for more. And the notary stamp belonged to Doris Ketchum Sweet Lady, famous for her banana bread at church potlucks, who'd been dead a full 13 months before this deal supposedly went down. Unless Doris had taken up part-time ghost notarizing, someone was forging signatures. Badly. That's when I knew I needed backup, someone with a sharp eye and zero patience for shady land grabs. So I called Frank Bulldog Hanley. Bulldog's a retired surveyor, built like an oak tree, with a permanent squint that makes you feel like you've done something wrong just by existing. If land could talk, it would tell you it's scared of him. 2 days later, Bulldog showed up at my place with his GPS gear, chewing tobacco and muttering about rookie crooks who don't even bother to hide their mistakes. We set out to walk every inch of the property. The autumn sun was warm on our backs, the grass crunching underfoot. And every so often, Bulldog would spit and grumble. Amateurs. Pure amateurs. His equipment confirmed it. Cedar Ridge Estates was planted smack in the middle of my property, not a single inch over or under. 98 houses, plus the pool, clubhouse, and tennis courts, all of it was on my dirt. About halfway through our survey, we were interrupted. One of Pamela's safety committee members rolled up in a golf cart, wearing khaki shorts, a tucked-in polo, and mirrored sunglasses like he thought he was guarding the president. "Sir, you're not allowed to be here," he said, puffing up his chest. Bulldog didn't even look up from his equipment. "Son, I've been measuring land since before you were born. You might want to move that toy car before I accidentally measure it into a sinkhole." The man sputtered, turned an impressive shade of red, and sped away so fast his little golf cart tires squealed. We laughed until I nearly dropped my coffee thermos. But the humor didn't last long. Later that afternoon, I got an anonymous phone call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was low, almost whispering, "Accidents happen to stubborn old men." Then the line went dead. That same evening, my mailbox was blocked off with orange cones, and a laminated sign zip-tied to it read, "HOA property, do not tamper." They'd effectively stolen my mail without even bothering to hide it. And then I saw the cameras. Small, black, weatherproof security cameras strapped to the trunks of my oak trees, their little red lights blinking like tiny, smug eyes. Thick black cables snaked down the bark and into the ground toward Cedar Ridge. A quick inspection revealed what I suspected: they were siphoning power from my meter to run Pamela's surveillance operation. Years back, I'd helped a client catch copper thieves using an electromagnetic field detector from the hardware store. I still had it hanging in my shed. When I passed it near the cables, it lit up like a Christmas tree. They'd been tapping into my electricity for who knows how long. I stood there, hand on the oak's rough bark, thinking about my grandfather. He'd fought the railroad company tooth and nail in 1982 when they tried to skim off a chunk of our property. I remembered his words clear as a bell: "When someone steals your land, they're not just taking dirt, they're stealing your family's history. And you don't sell that for pocket change." For a fleeting moment, I considered just taking whatever hush money Pamela was bound to offer and finding somewhere quiet to live out my days. But then I looked across the pasture, what was left of it, and saw Caroline's rose bushes blooming by the old fence. I could almost hear her voice. Sam Whitaker doesn't roll over. He digs in. So I made up my mind. That night, under the dim yellow glow of my porch light, with the smell of Caroline's roses drifting in from the garden, I started my plan. Step 1, document everything. Photos, videos, copies of records, even those smug HOA safety patrols with their matching golf carts. Step 2, find someone with a voice loud enough to make the whole county hear the truth. Step 3, wait for Pamela to make the one mistake that would hang her with her own rope. It didn't take long. 2 days later, I spotted her parading through Cedar Ridge with a camera crew from the local news. She was doing a community spotlight segment, talking about the safety and unity of Cedar Ridge Estates. All I could think was, "Pamela, you're building your own gallows, and I'll be the one holding the blueprint." I just needed an ally with the guts to tell the story right. And, as fate would have it, that ally was about to walk straight into my life, notebook in hand, with more curiosity than fear. 2 mornings later, I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I saw an unfamiliar sedan pull into my driveway. It was dusty, like it had been chasing stories down dirt roads for a while. Out stepped a woman in jeans, boots that had actually seen mud, and a leather satchel slung across her shoulder. She introduced herself as Rachel Monroe, investigative reporter for the Nashville Tribune. "Mr. Whitaker, I've been following the coverage about Cedar Ridge," she said, her voice calm but with a spark of curiosity you can't fake. "I watched the Channel 7 piece. It didn't sit right." I grinned, though my coffee mug hid it. Because it was garbage. Her smile was quick. Because it was too polished, too one-sided. I've covered enough white-collar crime to know when I'm watching a performance. And Pamela Rutledge. She's not just an HOA president who got lucky. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table my grandfather once spread maps across when he was teaching me how to measure boundaries by the sun's shadow. I laid out my folder, the courthouse copies, Bulldog's GPS data, and photos of those dead oak cameras feeding power to Cedar Ridge. Rachel took notes so fast her pen was a blur. "The notary was dead before the documents were signed?" she asked, her eyebrows shooting up. "Dead and buried. Best banana bread in Pine Hollow County. Though," I said, "unless Pamela's running a seance." "Those papers are forgeries." Rachel leaned back in her chair. "You know, forgers usually slip up because they think no one will bother to check." She counted on the fact that most people don't read legal descriptions. "That's the mistake." I said, "I'm not most people." Before she left, Rachel promised she'd start pulling her own public records, cross-checking every claim Pamela had made. But she also gave me a warning. If she's this bold, she's not just stealing from you. There's probably a whole network propping her up. And people like that, they fight dirty. Turns out, dirty didn't even begin to cover it. The very next day, I got my property insurance cancellation notice in the mail. The letter claimed a significant change in land use had voided my coverage, citing aerial photos of residential development on my property. And guess who had part-time access to that insurance company's database? Pamela. It was timed perfectly cut off my coverage, leave me vulnerable, and then ramp up the pressure. That same afternoon, one of her safety committee members, the same golf cart cowboy from before, parked at the end of my driveway, snapping photos every time I walked outside. I waved. He didn't wave back. By the week's end, Rachel called with her first set of findings. Your instincts were right. The development plans for Cedar Ridge, they're 2 years older than the supposed purchase date. I pulled them off the Wayback Machine from a deleted developer website. She also found something else, a sealed juvenile record from Kentucky for none other than Craig Rutledge. The charge real estate fraud. Your town councilman's been running this game since he was a teenager, Rachel said. Only now, he's got his wife, a subdivision, and a county network behind him. That night, as I walked my fence line, I noticed bulldozer tracks leading down toward Maple Brook. Fresh tire marks cut through the mud, heading straight into an area of my land I'd kept wild for decades. In the dim light, I could see disturbed soil like something had been buried or covered. The next morning, I went down there with my phone camera. The smell hit me first sharp. Chemical. Wrong. I saw runoff trickling into the creek, a thin sheen of rainbow-colored oil floating on the surface. I took samples and called Rachel immediately. Within 48 hours, she'd brought in an environmental scientist, Dr. Howard, who confirmed my worst fear construction runoff from Cedar Ridge was contaminating my water. Worse yet, the soil tests showed traces of toxic waste buried under the fill dirt. This isn't just property theft anymore, Rachel said, looking grim. This is environmental crime. That means EPA jurisdiction. Pamela must have sensed the shift because the harassment doubled overnight. My truck tires got slashed again. Someone left a dead possum on my porch. And the HOA Facebook group suddenly lit up with posts about me poisoning the water to frame them. But here's the thing about 45 years in land surveying, you learn patience. You let the other side overplay their hand while you keep gathering proof. Rachel and I set up trail cameras hidden along the property line. We caught HOA committee members trespassing, dumping soil, even holding what looked like a midnight meeting with construction crews in the back of the subdivision. Then, Bulldog found the smoking gun, a set of survey markers, freshly placed, that moved my boundary line inward by nearly 200 feet. Whoever did it used cheap aluminum stakes and spray paint amateur hour compared to the original iron pins my grandfather set in concrete. We photographed everything. The next time Pamela sent her safety patrol to tell me I was trespassing, I smiled for his camera, then snapped my own picture of him standing 3 feet inside my property. Smile. I said, you're in federal trespassing territory now. Pamela was playing checkers. I was setting up chess. And the queen was about to realize she'd been walking into a trap since the day she poured her first driveway. The bigger picture was coming into focus, and with Rachel digging into Craig's finances, we were about to see just how far this HOA web stretched. Rachel called me 2 mornings later, her voice tight with excitement. Sam, you need to come down to the courthouse archives. I've found something that's going to blow Pamela's little empire wide open. I was in my truck before my coffee even finished brewing. The morning air was thick with Pine Hollow's early summer humidity, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've walked 10 steps. I drove into town with my old surveyor's compass hanging from the rearview mirror, the same one my grandfather carried in 1924 when he inked a deal that, unbeknownst to Pamela, was about to decide her fate. Rachel was waiting at the back entrance, hair a bit wild, clutching a stack of coffee-stained documents like they were the Dead Sea Scrolls. Follow me, she said, leading me down a flight of creaky stairs into a basement that smelled like mothballs and broken promises. On a rickety table under a flickering fluorescent light, She laid out manila envelopes stamped Federal Railway Commission. The paper inside was yellowed, edges curled, but the typewriter ink was still bold. "Sam," she said, tapping the header, "this is your grandfather's original easement agreement with the Tennessee Central Railroad. Look at Clause 7. I read the paragraph twice before it sank in. My grandfather hadn't just negotiated mineral rights. He'd secured a development protection clause so ironclad it made modern contracts look like grocery lists. It stated that any unauthorized structure built on Whitaker land would automatically become property of the Whitaker family, along with all improvements, fixtures, and yes, every blade of grass." Rachel grinned, "which means every single house, clubhouse, tennis court, and pool in Cedar Ridge is legally yours the moment they poured the foundation." The contract's kicker, it was filed federally, giving it jurisdiction over county and city property laws. No local judge, council vote, or HOA ruling could override it. I leaned back, letting out a low whistle. Pamela's been squatting on my land, and she didn't even know she handed me the deed to her kingdom. Rachel wasn't finished. She spread out aerial photos showing that Cedar Ridge's boundary stakes had been moved during one of my trips to Oregon. And here's the best part. Her research showed Craig Rutledge had accessed these very railway archives 3 years ago while doing genealogy research, which meant he'd known about Clause 7 the whole time and gambled I'd never dig deep enough to find it. Craig built a whole subdivision on land he knew he could never legally own. Rachel said, shaking her head, "That's not just fraud, that's industrial strength stupidity." We did some quick math. 98 houses at $350,000 apiece, plus the amenities, totaled over $40 million under my grandfather's clause. All of it belonged to me. I laughed so hard tears welled up in my eyes. She thought she was outsmarting a man who's been documenting property lines for 45 years. Instead, she's about to gift wrap the whole subdivision for me. But we couldn't just walk in and claim it. Not yet. The trick was timing. Pamela was planning a community unity festival to sway public opinion before an emergency city council vote to annex Cedar Ridge into Redwood Bluff's limits. If she succeeded, Craig could bury the fraud under city-controlled zoning laws. Rachel and I decided the festival would be her public undoing. We'd line up federal EPA agents to investigate the environmental crimes, FBI agents to serve fraud warrants, and U.S. Marshals to enforce the 1924 contract. That's when we brought in Marcus Wade, a silver-haired federal prosecutor who'd sent more white-collar criminals to prison than I'd had hot dinners. Marcus read through my grandfather's easement papers and grinned like a wolf spotting a wounded deer. "Sam, this clause is tighter than a drum. I've prosecuted railroad easement cases before, but this is bulletproof." We looped in Dr. Howard and an EPA wetland specialist, Dr. Lightfoot, who confirmed Cedar Ridge had been built over federally protected wetlands without permits. That alone carried fines so steep they could bankrupt the Rutledges 10 times over. Then Rachel found the cherry on top, a series of shell companies tied to overseas bank accounts, Russian ones funneling money into Cedar Ridge's construction loans. Craig Rutledge wasn't just a small-town grifter. He was laundering money through my stolen land. We spent the next week turning Rachel's living room into a war room. Maps, photographs, forged deeds, environmental reports. Every scrap of evidence was laid out in precise order. Bulldog even came by with a thermos of coffee and a grin, muttering, "Pamela's gonna need more than her HOA newsletter to get out of this." The plan was simple. Let Pamela believe the festival was her victory lap. She'd invite media, politicians, and families all there to see her as the savior of Cedar Ridge. Meanwhile, we'd unleash every piece of evidence at once, right in front of her donors, neighbors, and the evening news. I could already picture it, barbecue smoke in the air, kids in bounce houses, and Pamela in her tailored white blazer smiling for the cameras just as the U.S. Marshals stepped in. Rachel chuckled as we went over the timeline. "Sam, this is going to be the most expensive block party in Pine Hollow history." I smiled back, feeling that freight train inside me picking up speed. And Pamela's about to find out that the track she's standing on, my family built it. Festival week in Pine Hollow County felt like watching a pot boil. You could see the bubbles forming under the surface. But the real eruption hadn't started yet. Pamela Rutledge had thrown every ounce of HOA flair into making her Cedar Ridge Unity Festival look like the social event of the decade. Flyers went up in every coffee shop and diner. Her Facebook page blasted posts about celebrating community values and protecting our neighborhood from outside threats, a thinly veiled jab at me, accompanied by a carefully chosen picture of my old farmhouse looking particularly weather-beaten after a rainstorm. I didn't bother responding. Let her spin her fairy tale. I had a better story, and mine came with federal backup. By Wednesday, the sabotage started. My internet and phone lines were cut overnight. My truck tires slashed again. A note was left under the wiper that read, "Stop now or you'll regret it." I took a photo, dropped it into the evidence folder, and made sure Marcus Wade saw it. Intimidation attempt. He said, "Good. That'll play well in court." Pamela's safety committee doubled their patrols. They rode their golf carts like they were in a NASCAR race, cameras mounted on the dashboards, snapping pictures of me every time I stepped outside. One of them even blocked my driveway for a full 20 minutes while pretending to check a property boundary. Meanwhile, Rachel's phone buzzed constantly with updates from our contacts. The FBI had confirmed that the shell companies tied to Cedar Ridge matched ones under investigation in 3 other states. The EPA scheduled their site inspection for the exact morning of the festival timed so they'd be collecting soil samples while the news cameras were rolling. The Friday before the festival, things got ugly. Rachel's car was vandalized outside her motel windshield smashed. The words "liar" spray-painted across the hood in sloppy red letters. She called me from the parking lot, furious but unshaken. "They think this is going to scare me off, Sam. I've covered gang trials. An HOA with golf carts doesn't even crack the top 10. Later that day, Marcus told us 3 city council members had received anonymous $10,000 payments right before the emergency annexation vote scheduled for Saturday morning. But here's the kicker. Rachel's hidden camera team caught the cash handoffs in a grocery store parking lot. Grainy footage, yes, but clear enough to show Craig Rutledge's smug face handing over envelopes. I spent Friday evening walking my fence line, double-checking the trail cameras Bulldog and I had set up. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and honeysuckle, but I could taste the tension like metal on my tongue. Out in the distance, I could see the glow of Cedar Ridge's string lights being set up for the festival. Pamela was going all in. By Saturday morning, the weather was disgustingly perfect blue skies, just enough breeze to make the flags wave prettily over the festival grounds. The smell of barbecue and funnel cakes drifted all the way to my porch. From a distance, it looked like any wholesome small-town event. Kids bouncing in inflatable castles, a local band tuning their instruments, politicians shaking hands like they were running for governor. I parked my truck a block away, just as we'd planned. Marcus was already there, dressed in his best suit, blending in with the crowd. Dr. Lightfoot carried her EPA sampling kit in what looked like a picnic basket. Rachel had a press badge hanging from her neck and a camera crew positioned like they were filming a travel documentary. Pamela stood near the main stage in an immaculate white blazer, pearls gleaming, her hair so perfect it could have been sculpted. She worked the crowd like a seasoned politician, kissing babies, hugging residents, all smiles for the cameras. When she spotted me, her expression froze for just a fraction of a second, long enough to tell me she hadn't expected me to show up. Then the smile snapped back into place. "Mr. Whitaker," she said loudly enough for nearby microphones to pick it up. "I hope you're here to make peace today." I tipped my hat. "Oh, I'm here to make something. Pamela, just wait and see." The schedule was tight. At 10:30, Dr. Lightfoot began her picnic by the wetlands, discreetly collecting soil and water samples. By 11 Huzzers, the EPA vans pulled up unmarked, but anyone paying attention could tell they weren't there for funnel cake. At 11:15, Rachel's crew uploaded the first wave of our evidence package to the Tribune's website. But the real show was at noon. Pamela took the stage with a microphone in hand, her voice carrying over the crowd. She talked about community unity and standing strong against outside threats. Then, in her grand gesture, she unveiled an oversized check for $3,000 supposedly to resolve the dispute, meaning to pay me off quietly in front of her audience. I walked up onto the stage slowly, every step measured. Pamela, I said into the mic. "That's a very generous offer for something you already lost the day you poured your first foundation." And right on cue, the U.S. Marshal stepped forward from the crowd, cameras flashed, people gasped, Pamela's eyes went wide, and for the first time since I'd met her, she had no words. Marcus read the charges: fraud, money laundering, environmental crimes, conspiracy. The list went on for 2 solid minutes, and while the marshals cuffed her, Dr. Lightfoot announced the EPA's findings. Cedar Ridge was built over contaminated wetlands, and the entire subdivision would be evacuated immediately. Rachel caught my eye from the side of the stage, her camera crew recording every second. "Smile. Sam," she mouthed. "We just made history." I tipped my hat again, but this time, it was to the crowd. The moment Pamela's wrists clicked into those shiny steel cuffs, Cedar Ridge's perfect little festival unraveled faster than a cheap sweater in a barbed wire fence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few of her loyalists shouted about government overreach and innocent until proven guilty, but most folks just stood frozen, watching their HOA queen frog-marched off the stage. Craig Rutledge wasn't there, not yet, but Marcus had assured me the FBI had him covered. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, a pair of federal agents escorted him from the VIP tent, his face pale under his politician's tan. The camera shutters snapped like popcorn in a skillet. Meanwhile, the bounce house sat deflating in the background, a perfect metaphor for the day. I took the microphone Pamela had dropped and held up my grandfather's 1924 easement document, the yellowed paper fluttering in the breeze. "Folks, this isn't just about me," I said, letting my voice carry the way years of hollering property lines had taught me. "This is about the truth. My grandfather was smart enough to protect our land from exactly this kind of theft. Under this contract, recognized by federal law, every single structure built without permission on Whitaker land automatically belongs to the Whitaker family." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Some residents looked relieved. Others looked like their stomachs had just dropped into their shoes. "Now, I know many of you bought your homes in good faith." I continued. "You were lied to, and I'm not here to punish the innocent. Anyone who wants to stay can work out a fair rent-to-own agreement while the courts sort out the mess. But you need to understand, Pamela and Craig didn't just steal from me. They stole from all of you." That's when Dr. Lightfoot stepped up and dropped the real bombshell. She held up her EPA report. "The soil and groundwater here are contaminated with industrial chemicals. This site was built on federally protected wetlands without permits. You're going to have to evacuate immediately for your health and safety, especially the children." The collective gasp that followed was like a sudden wind. Mothers clutched their kids. Fathers pulled out phones. News crews swarmed. One man in the back shouted, "We drank that water," and a ripple of panic moved through the crowd. Pamela's die-hard supporters started to crumble. I heard one woman mutter, "She told us the tests were fine." Another said, "We trusted her with everything." The chaos only grew when Marcus took the mic again. "In addition to environmental crimes, fraud, and money laundering, both Pamela and Craig are under investigation for using your HOA fees to fund personal vacations, luxury cars, and offshore accounts." Someone yelled. So the bake sales were for their crews. Rachel's camera crew caught every expression: the disbelief, the anger, the dawning realization that the dream homes they'd poured their savings into were built on poisoned ground and stolen land. Right then, Sheriff Tim Hanley, a man who had kept his distance from the Rutledges for years, stepped forward. He wasn't smiling. "By order of the U.S., Marshals and the EPA, Cedar Ridge is now a federal crime scene. You have 48 hours to gather your belongings." It was like dropping a stone into a pond. The ripples hit everyone at once. Some people broke down crying. Others stormed off in anger. And a few came straight up to me, asking if my rent-to-own offer was real. "It's real," I said, "because I'm not in the business of stealing dreams, but I am in the business of protecting what's mine and making sure thieves pay for every last inch they took." Rachel pulled me aside, her phone buzzing nonstop with calls from national news outlets. "Sam," she said, "this story just went national. You're about to have every reporter from here to Washington knocking on your door." I glanced toward the stage, where Pamela was being loaded into a federal transport van. her pearl necklace still in place, but her smug smile gone. Craig followed right behind her, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Good, I said. Let them knock. I've got a story to tell and a few lessons to share about what happens when you underestimate an old surveyor. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows over the mess they'd made of my land. But for the first time in months, I could see the path forward clear as a freshly marked boundary line. If I thought things had been loud before, the hours after Pamela and Craig's arrests turned Cedar Ridge into the noisiest place in Pine Hollow County. By 3 p.m., news vans lined the main road like it was the red carpet at a Hollywood premiere. Reporters in perfectly pressed suits stood in front of cameras, waving their arms at the backdrop of deflating bounce houses, toppled banners, and families shoving boxes into SUVs. The smell of funnel cake still hung in the air, but now it mixed with something sharper fear. Rachel worked the crowd like a conductor, introducing residents to reporters who wanted first-hand accounts. Some spoke with tears in their eyes about being lied to. Others clammed up, their faces tight, still clinging to the hope that Pamela's arrest was all some big misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Marcus and the marshals were running what looked like a military operation. Evidence teams in gloves and boot covers fanned out, bagging soil, photographing construction defects, and documenting every code violation they could find. The EPA folks were right behind them, their clipboards snapping open and shut as they taped red hazard notices to front doors. At the same time, the ripple effect hit the local economy. The Cedar Ridge Bakery shut its doors mid-afternoon. The owner was the HOA treasurer, and rumors spread she'd been funneling community improvement funds into Pamela's personal account. The real estate office downtown quietly pulled every Cedar Ridge listing from their window display. I kept my hat pulled low and stuck to the sidelines, but folks kept coming up to me. "Mr. Whitaker," one older man said, his voice thick with shame. "I'm sorry I believed her over you. I should have known better." I nodded. We all want to believe the person with the smile and the clipboard. That's how they get you. But it's what you do after you know the truth that matters. Another woman, clutching a toddler on her hip, asked me straight out if she could stay. I don't care about the HOA. I just want my kid to have a yard. I told her the same thing I told everyone else that day. Once the EPA clears the land, we'll work it out. But I won't promise you a yard on poisoned dirt. By late afternoon, the crowd thinned. The media crews stayed, sensing the story still had legs, but most residents retreated into their houses to start packing. A few lingered by the clubhouse, whispering in small circles. One of them, a man in a polo shirt I recognized from Pamela's safety committee, glared at me like I'd just burned down his favorite fishing spot. Rachel caught the look and leaned over. That one's not done causing trouble. She wasn't wrong. As we headed toward my truck, the guy walked past, muttering loud enough for me to hear, "This isn't over." I didn't stop. "You're right," I called over my shoulder. "It's just starting." That night, my farmhouse felt different. The same creaky floors, the same smell of Caroline's rose bushes drifting in through the window, but the air felt lighter. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from old friends, neighbors, and even strangers from across the country who'd seen clips online. The hashtags #CedarRidgeScam and #JusticeForSam were already trending. Rachel called just before midnight. "Your national news now. Sam, the Washington Post wants an interview. CNN's trying to get a camera crew out there. And the governor's office just put out a statement about ensuring integrity in rural development." I chuckled. Well, that's a first. Usually politicians ignore Pine Hollow unless there's a county fair or a ribbon cutting. But as I hung up and turned out the light, I knew this wasn't over, not for me, not for the residents, and certainly not for Pamela and Craig. Their empire had crumbled, sure, but there was still the matter of making it official in court, securing my land, and cleaning up the mess they'd left behind. Tomorrow, the real work of reclaiming what was mine would begin. The Monday after the festival felt like the first day of planting season, a lot of work ahead, but with the satisfaction of knowing the field was finally cleared of weeds. By 8 a.m., Marcus and I were walking up the marble steps of the federal courthouse in Nashville, the 1924 easement document tucked under my arm like a prized family photo. The Rutledge's lawyers had already filed for an emergency injunction to stop the feds from seizing Cedar Ridge, claiming the arrests were premature and that the EPA's findings were inconclusive. It didn't go well for them. Marcus laid out our evidence with the precision of a man who'd been sharpening his blade for decades. Forged notary stamps, survey lines shifted by hundreds of feet, shell company trails leading to offshore accounts in Cyprus and Russia. And finally, the crown jewel, my grandfather's Clause 7. When the judge read it aloud, you could feel the tension drain from the Rutledge's side of the room. It was clear, ironclad, and left no wiggle room. Any unauthorized construction on Whitaker land became Whitaker property immediately. Pamela's attorney tried to argue that the clause was obsolete and outdated in the modern legal landscape. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with the kind of stare that could strip paint, leaned forward and said, "Counselor, federal law does not expire because your client finds it inconvenient." By the end of the hearing, the injunction was denied, and the court scheduled a full trial for fraud, conspiracy, and environmental violations. The U.S. Marshals officially secured Cedar Ridge as evidence, meaning Pamela and Craig couldn't so much as set foot on the land without permission. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Rachel stepped in front of them with her microphone, narrating the day's events like she was hosting her own news special. I gave a short statement. This isn't just a win for me. It's a win for anyone who's had their land, their rights, or their community stolen by people who think money makes them untouchable. That night, back in Pine Hollow, I found myself looking at Cedar Ridge differently. The manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses weren't symbols of theft anymore. They were leverage, assets, a future that could be shaped on my terms. Within a week, Marcus had set up a legal pathway for residents who wanted to stay fair rent-to-own contracts based on the real value of their homes, not the inflated prices Pamela had gouged them for. About half of the families signed on immediately. The others decided to cut their losses and leave, some with anger, others with quiet resignation. Meanwhile, Rachel kept publishing article after article, each one peeling back another layer of the Rutledge's operation. She uncovered ties to a construction company in Florida with a history of EPA violations and a network of consultants who specialized in fast-tracking shady developments through small-town councils. The story spread, pulling in investigators from 3 other states. Pamela and Craig sat in jail awaiting trial, their bail hearings denied due to flight risk. Rumor had it Craig tried to move $2 million out of an offshore account the day after his arrest, and that sealed his fate. Bulldog dropped by one afternoon, leaning on my fence with his usual half-smile. "You realize you've done more damage to dirty developers in 3 months than the county's done in 30 years, I shrugged. Guess I was overdue for a big project. But the truth was, I wasn't just cleaning up a mess. I was building something new, something Caroline would have been proud of. Cedar Ridge wasn't going to be an eyesore of fraud and poisoned soil. It was going to be part of the Whitaker legacy, a place that actually honored the land it stood on. And with the trial date closing in, I had one more card to play. The trial began on a crisp October morning, the kind where Pine Hollow's hillsides burn with autumn color fiery reds, deep golds, and the kind of clear blue sky that makes you think everything's in its rightful place. Except, of course, for Pamela and Craig Rutledge, who now sat in the defendants' chairs wearing county-issued beige instead of tailored suits. The federal courthouse in Nashville was packed. Reporters filled the back rows. Residents from Cedar Ridge sat on one side of the gallery, and a few curious locals from Pine Hollow had made the drive just to see if the rumors about the HOA Queen's fall from grace were true. Marcus opened with a quiet confidence that made the jury lean in. He laid out the story like a road map, the forged notary stamp. The boundary stakes shifted in the dead of night, the offshore money laundering, and the environmental violations that had poisoned my land. Then he dropped the 1924 easement clause like a gavel, explaining in plain language how every blade of grass at Cedar Ridge now legally belonged to the Whitaker family. The prosecution's witnesses rolled in one after another. First up was Bulldog, his GPS equipment photos projected on the courtroom screen. He explained exactly how Cedar Ridge sat squarely on my property, his gravelly voice leaving no room for doubt. The defense tried to rattle him, but Bulldog just leaned forward and said, "Son, I've been doing this longer than you've been shaving." The jury chuckled. The defense lawyer flushed. Next came Dr. Lightfoot, the EPA scientist, who calmly walked through her findings. She showed soil samples glowing with hazardous chemicals, photos of wetlands destroyed by illegal fill dirt, and a map of the contamination plume spreading downstream. When the defense suggested her tests were possibly flawed, she tilted her head and said, "So are your client's permits, except theirs are flawed by design." Then it was Rachel's turn. She projected the deleted development plans from the Wayback Machine, each page time-stamped 2 years before the supposed sale date. She read from Craig's sealed juvenile record for real estate fraud, explaining how the Rutledges had built their scheme on a lifetime of deception. And finally, Maria Santos, a Cedar Ridge homeowner, took the stand. She described buying her house, believing Pamela's promises, and then learning the truth about the land, the water, and the stolen HOA funds. Her voice shook, but her words hit like a hammer. "We trusted them. They told us this was forever. It turns out it was never even theirs to sell." The defense tried everything, claiming I'd abandoned the back pasture, suggesting the 1924 clause was unreasonable, and even hinting that my memory might be faulty due to age. But Marcus was ready. He rolled out a massive, blown-up photo of my grandfather's signed easement, then looked the jury dead in the eye. Some people inherit money. Mr. Whitaker inherited integrity. And today, you have the chance to protect that. The moment that sealed it came during Pamela's own testimony. She'd dressed up as much as jail rules allowed, hair neatly braided, pearl earrings plastic, now clipped to her lobes. She started with her usual sugary tone, talking about protecting families and community spirit. But Marcus's cross-examination was a scalpel. "Mrs. Rutledge, do you deny using HOA funds for personal vacations? Those were community research trips," she stammered. "Do you deny ordering the burial of toxic waste under fill dirt at Cedar Ridge?" "Why, I have no knowledge of that." He slid a photo across the table. "That's you, standing next to the bulldozer, pointing at the spot where the waste was dumped. Would you like to explain that to the jury?" Her composure cracked. The sugar in her voice turned bitter. "This is a witch hunt. These people don't deserve those houses anyway." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Craig winced and dropped his head into his hands. 3 hours later, the jury returned, guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, environmental crimes, and money laundering. Pamela got 15 years in federal prison. Craig got 20. The judge called their crimes a case study in greed disguised as civic duty. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into that perfect autumn air, the easement document still under my arm. Rachel was waiting with her camera crew, smiling like she'd just hit the front page again. "You did it, Sam," she said. "No, I told her. We did it. And now it's time to fix what they broke." 6 months later, Cedar Ridge didn't look anything like the glossy brochures Pamela had once waved around like gospel. The big Cedar Ridge Estates sign was gone, replaced by a simple wooden arch with Whitaker Land and Wildlife Reserve carved into it. The once manicured lawns had given way to patches of native grass and wildflowers, planted to help the soil recover from years of chemical abuse. The pool, tennis courts, and clubhouse now sat empty, roped off with bright yellow EPA warning tape until the final phase of cleanup was complete. Most of the families who stayed had signed on to my rent-to-own plan, paying fair market rates without the HOA leeches skimming off the top. We held monthly meetings in the old farmhouse, no badges, no power trips, no approved flower color nonsense. The first time someone asked if they could paint their shutters red, I told them, "It's your home. Paint it plaid if you want." The laughter that followed was the sound of people breathing free for the first time in years. The wetlands restoration was already showing results. Dr. Yipin Lightfoot brought a group of school kids to the property one sunny afternoon, teaching them about the return of the salamanders and the wild ducks nesting by Maple Brook. Watching those kids run around barefoot in clean grass instead of across concrete made every court date, every long night, every ounce of stress worth it. Rachel's final article ran in the Washington Post under the headline, "The HOA Queen Who Built on Stolen Land and Lost Everything." It earned her a journalism award, but she still came down to Pine Hollow twice a year to visit. We'd sit on the porch with coffee and pie, swapping updates and shaking our heads at how one HOA's greed had changed the whole county. Pamela and Craig are still in federal prison. Word is, Pamela tried starting an inmate improvement committee and got shut down fast. Craig spends his days in the prison library, probably still looking for loopholes. The Thornfield now Whitaker easement story made its way into property law seminars and surveying textbooks. I started teaching a night class at the community college, showing students how to protect their land with airtight documentation and a stubborn streak a mile wide. And every year, on the anniversary of the festival, we hold the Whitaker Heritage Day music, local crafts, barbecue, and storytelling under the oak tree where Caroline carved our initials. No gimmicks, no politics, just neighbors being neighbors. Caroline's roses still bloom by the fence, I tell her. Every time I visit her grave, how the land's healing, how the people are building lives here without fear, and how her words Sam fights for what's right, not what's easy carried me through the worst of it. Here's the lesson I want you to remember when someone tries to steal your land. They're not just taking soil and grass, they're taking history, heritage, and the future you're meant to pass on. Stand your ground, document everything, and don't let a smile and a clipboard trick you into thinking they're your friend. If this story reminded you of your own fight against an HOA or a land dispute, tell it in the comments. You never know, your story might give someone else the courage to push back. And if you want more tales of ordinary folks beating extraordinary corruption, hit that subscribe button, because out here in Pine Hollow County, we've proved one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. No matter how slick the scheme, honest ground will outlast dirty hands every single time.